we say this is a subjective experience, what are some of the things, Nathan, that we need to be aware of before we even light a cigar or when we're lighting a cigar? Things like, food or drink or lack of either or mood. Like what are some of those things that affect that subjective experience?
So mood definitely has a big factor on cigars. You can take your favorite cigar. If you've had just a crummy day, you light it up, it's not the same.
Interesting.
Also, if you ever smoke a cigar for the first time and you're in a bad mood, you're going to remember that, and it's not going to be as good.
Yeah.
And then every time you smoke it again, unless you can force yourself to go into it with an open mind, you're going to be reminded of that crummy day.
Yeah.
And you're going to be like, oh, this is the worst.
Yeah.
Kind of like enjoying a wine.
Absolutely.
It is
Anything
about
that
the
is
experience in its
experiential.
entirety.
Yeah. So, I obviously get to smoke a lot of cigars because of what we do for a living, but I've learned from Nathan and other way more experienced cigar smokers to really be in the moment when I'm enjoying a cigar. And yeah, it sounds a little hokey to say that this is a Zen experience for me, but honestly, that's kind of what it's becoming. Because there's an old samurai maxim that says you should always try to be in the moment because that's generally the only place where things are actually happening. And if you see people that get easily distracted and that are constantly relighting their cigars, it's probably a good indicator that they're not in the moment. Consequently, they may not be enjoying that cigar as much as they could be if they were just really focused on every time they take a puff of their cigar, they're conscious of the mouthfeel, they're conscious of the flavor notes that they're getting on their palate and through their nose. And let's talk a little bit. I keep hitting your pot here. I'm so sorry, bud. I'm going to back that up a little bit.
Yeah.
We're trying not to make a mess, so we've got our pots down here, but who knows. Let's talk about the draw. So when I first started smoking cigars, no one taught me about the draw. You actually taught me more about how to properly draw on a cigar and enjoy it than anybody else. So let's help Earl's audience.
Okay. So I think that one of the easiest ways to kind of maintain the burn on your cigar through drawing is 1 to 2 puffs, let it rest. Because otherwise you're going to be smoking it too fast, it'll get hotter, and you're going to burn away that flavor because you're just going to get more heat. A good way to kind of tell if that's what's happening is when you ash. Typically you want a flat ash going across, maybe a slight dome in the middle.
The burn line, so to speak, or the actual end of it?
So the end of it. So it should just be basically a circle. If you're smoking it too fast, it'll kind of look like a bullet where it will be pointed and red in the middle. You're smoking it too fast because the wrapper and the binder are outburning the filler. So you're kind of taking away the flavor of the cigar and the time that you could spend smoking the cigar. Another good way to kind of help regulate that is don't just puff it exactly the same way. Like either as you're drawing, slowly rotate it, or as you bring it up, just rotate it a little bit each time. Kind of like a chicken, like you just kind of keep rotating.
Like a rotisserie.
Yeah, like a rotisserie.
I want to add on to that just a little bit. So there are some basic things that cigar smokers take for granted, and I generally have to remind myself that a lot of people are just getting into cigars for the first time. Here's one that seems intuitive to me, but I know is actually not for some people. You do not actually inhale cigar smoke.
I'm going to ask you about that.
Yeah. This is not a cigarette. This is not filtered tobacco. This is premium hand-rolled tobacco in its purest form. And it is meant to be an olfactory and a palatal experience. So when we say draw, we do not mean inhale. A draw is different from an inhale in that an inhale you are now filling up your entire lungs with something, whether it's just the oxygen from the room or say the smoke of a cigarette or the mist off a vape. You're pulling that all the way down into your lungs. You are not doing that with a cigar. What you're doing is you are drawing on the cigar. So you would have to imagine puckering, and then what I like to tell people to imagine to do is take the tip of your tongue, start at the front of your mouth, and then slowly pull in air and draw your tongue backwards. That is a draw. So you're going to be pulling smoke into your mouth cavity and a little bit of your nasal cavity, and you're going to hold on to it for just a little bit, and then you're going to release it like this. That's a draw. It did not go down into my lungs. It stayed completely here. It never got into my esophagus. A little later on down the line, we can teach you about something called a retrohale, which is where you actually push smoke out through your nasal cavity, because that also gives you more information about the flavor profile of a cigar. But for right now, we're going to keep it 101. So again, that's something that as a new cigar smoker, be aware of that. If you've been a cigarette smoker, it can be difficult to transition. I've known more than one person have a pull on their first cigar and make themselves violently ill because it never occurred to them, or they weren't taught, don't inhale that smoke. It is 100% unfiltered tobacco smoke. It will not be kind to your lungs.
It is also a denser smoke.
Yes.
So cigarette smoke, it's easy to get it all out of your lungs. Cigar smoke, denser, a little harsher, so it'll sit in your lungs. Like, you'll be coughing for a while.
It's heavier.
You're gonna feel it.
It's physically heavier.
Yeah,
Heavier smoke.
It sits down in there.
Yeah. So I've been deliberately not rotisserie my cigar so that we can get to this next point, which is you've cut your cigar, you've done your cold draw, so your sensors are sort of prepared for what's coming now. You've torched, or rather toasted off your cigar. You got a nice burn going. And you want to keep your burn line even. So I've deliberately let my burn line slip a little bit over the top because I haven't been rolling on it in order to demonstrate something called a touch-up. Now this is a very small, what would be considered a small touch-up, because I like my cigar too much to canoe it all the way down.
I'm heading there.
So I don't know if you can see it in the wide shot, but I've got on the top of my cigar, which is where I've been holding it, and this also has to do with the way you draw. Some people draw from the bottom, some people draw from the top, some people can get it square down the middle. I tend to draw from the top, and consequently what that means is, unless I rotate my cigar, the top of my cigar is going to burn slightly faster than the bottom. So I just slightly rotate it. In this case, you can see here that I need to do a little touch-up. So now we're going to teach you about a touch-up. So anytime your burn line gets too uneven for you, you're going to want to touch your cigar up. I prefer to do my touch-ups earlier rather than later, because if the burn line gets too deep, now you're basically having to burn off a whole bunch of wrapper, and that's going to affect the rest of the cigar, which you don't want to do. But I've got just a little bit here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that piece of wrapper that's longer than the rest, that hasn't gone to ash yet, and I'm going to, again, I'm keeping my torch well away. I'm going to wait till I start to see a little bit of red pop up there, and I'm trying to stay toward the ash and burn just a little bit of that wrapper, not too much. I'm going to angle it down a little bit so I'm not torching it too much. Now my burn line is evening out. And how many times would you say, on average, you're smoking, what, a Toro there?
Yes.
How many times on average would you say that you have to retouch your cigar? All things being equal, you're not getting distracted, you're not having to put it down for a while.
I would say it averages out to typically maybe once, occasionally twice a cigar.
Once or twice a cigar.
But I don't fix mine as early as you do. Mm-hmm. I'll wait until it's a little more pronounced. If it's minor, I'll just know what side it's on, and I'll keep that on the colder side of my draw. Mm-hmm. And I'll try and naturally just even it out.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to overheat any of the tobacco.
Exactly.
So I'll try and fix it organically, and then if I can't, and it just is persistent, either through air or rolling air. It's always a rolling air.
Yeah, it's never naked. It's always rolling air.
But then that's when I'll go in and do the touch-up.
And what about you? How often will you say you touch
probably a lot more than you two.
And by the way, one of our best friends, who is a very successful cigar rep, is the same way I am about the touch-up. If it gets a little uneven, his OCD kicks in, and we just gotta fix it. So if you're that personality type, that is perfectly okay. But to Nathan's point, you do not want to get too much heat once that cigar is lit, unless it goes completely out and you have to relight. You want to keep the torch off of your cigar as much as possible, within reason, I would say.
For sure.
A lot of that is going to depend on your smoking style, how often you draw, how deeply you draw. There's a lot that goes into it, but all of this is learned behavior. So the more cigars you smoke, the more you're going to figure out what your groove is. I would say don't be afraid to learn new things. One of the reasons we love cigars is because we're constantly learning new things from different people. So, the first thing I learned from Nathan was I was smoking cigars way too fast. And he told me exactly what he told you guys. He said, if your cigar looks like a bullet on the front, that's not a good thing. So,
I never knew why that occurred. I've had that. I don't get much of it anymore, but certainly in the past. I never gave it any thought in terms of
But
me.
having gotten that little piece of instruction from him, which was delivered very nicely and in a way that didn't make me feel like an ignoramus, it actually made me slow down, and now I enjoy my cigars more, even more than I already did. So there are lots of different things that you can do per your personality to enhance the enjoyment of your cigar. So what else on like basics or anything do you want to talk about before we just like open this up and start talking about culture and how much we don't like people who love Cubans?
I would say a very important thing for do's and don'ts that kind of has to do with everything that we've talked about is a little bit of etiquette when it comes to cutting your cigars and then also ashing your cigars and when you're done.
Very good point. Go for it.
So when you cut a cigar, if you own your own cutter, you can do anything that you want. You might be judged for it if it's weird, but you can do whatever you want. If you're in a shop or a lounge or you're borrowing your buddy's cutter, you cut it, that's it. You don't lick your cigar, don't then stick it in your mouth and slobber on it and then like, you know what? I need to use this again.
Oh, yeah.
Because other people use that, and no one wants to make out with all the dudes in the cigar shop.
That's a really good point. So here at the Smoking Lamp, we do have community cutters and community lighters. Every good cigar lounge does. And to Nathan's point, there are some guys that the way they start their cigar is sort of ritual, right? And I think for most of us, that's probably true. And one of the very common themes is before a person will cut the cap, they will do that. They will get it wet. Again, if you own your own cutter, that's fine. It's your cutter. You can do with it what you want. But please don't do that and then use a community cutter because it takes us a bit to sanitize that. And we don't want to have to do it. And then you mentioned ashing as well.
So, ashing, of course, it happens to everyone. It'll fall on the table, it'll fall on the floor, it'll fall in the seat or yourself. It's unavoidable, it happens. But another courtesy, especially in a lounge where other people are cleaning up after you, is you just want to take your cigar, and I already ashed, but you just want to either tap it or put it a little down and lightly tap it on the ashtray for it to fall. Because when you go like this and wipe it on the side, you're actually creating more of a mess because it gets on the lip or it falls on the side.
Yes.
And for like the pots that we have, it gets all over the floor and then people step on it and it just gets mushed.
What questions do you have for us, young man?
Well, let me take it a little bit wider here.
Okay.
How long have you been a cigar smoker?
So I started cigar smoking as early as possible. So
I've got a visual of a baby with a beard.
You're not far off.
Okay.
I think for legal purposes, we'll just leave it as young as possible. Continue.
So I graduated high school, obviously far too young to drink. Wanted to do something to celebrate, so I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna try a cigar. So I went to a shop for the first time. I'd smoked cigarettes a little bit before that point, so I had an idea of what to expect. Went in, I'm like, what do you recommend? And actually, it was a guy named David Benson, who ex-fire chief, fantastic guy, taught me so much about cigars, brought me into the humidor, walked me around for probably 30 minutes, just told me everything I wanted to know. Picked out a cigar, fell in love with it, and then got into the industry, actually worked at a cigar shop for a while, and learned like alcohol pairings, food pairings, broadened my horizons on just cigar knowledge in general. Now, as we said earlier, I'm a product manager, so I'm either people's least favorite or favorite person.
Well, so in a cigar lounge, it is really important to have a guy like Nathan, who not only is a fountain of knowledge about cigars, but also works that humidor back there. Part of that is knowing our community, knowing what the people who come in to see us on a regular basis like to smoke, but also not being afraid as an innovator to push people's horizons a little bit, bring in a line that is new to our humidor that we really like, because we try everything that comes in here.
Yes.
And it's important that we have a consensus. It's usually Nathan and myself, the owner Brian Berry, and maybe one or two other staffers. We'll sit around with a rep, we'll try the stuff, then the rep will leave and we'll give our honest feedback of, okay, do we like it? Do we think our community will like it? And why? And Nathan is just really one of the best in the business at figuring out not only what our regular clientele likes, but what people are going to want to try if they're a first-time cigar smoker and they're walking in here, they don't know anything. It's so important that we get a chance to talk to them and make them feel at home and at ease, and then walk them through, exactly what we're doing in this podcast right now, just, much more condensed. And we've got a humidor that I think should be the envy of any cigar lounge anywhere, because it's very varied, it's very broad, and we have something to fit everybody's taste, and everybody's taste is different, and that's okay. That's part of the culture.
You use the term sometimes community, and just as an observer, we'll call it. Obviously, I don't get in here every day, but
He gets in here most days, folks. He gets in here most days.
There's an awful lot of regular faces, and at least for myself, I think that community, and I think it's important to point out, at least again from my observation, it's a very eclectic mix. People tend to, I think, make assumptions about who a cigar smoker is.
Oh, yeah.
We have, from my observation, in terms of the people who come in here, we have a really broad-based and diverse group of folks of every flavor, whether you're talking about politically or ethnically or whatever else, that come in to enjoy that commonality of interest in the cigar.
Yeah.
I can remember the first time I saw a woman smoking a cigar, and I thought, I guess no reason not to. They can enjoy just as much as I did.
But let me ask you, that surprised you, though, clearly. And that
Without
probably
question.
surprised you because you had some preconceived notions about who cigar smokers were.
Without question, and of course, being unfortunately the oldest of the bunch sitting here, there was a time when there weren't a whole lot of women smoking cigars, and
Yeah.
if they did, they were probably Bonnie Parker running with Clyde, trying to make a point. And I some of the ladies that I've seen in here that sitting here working on their computer, and that's another thing. This is often a de facto office for the regulars,
Yes.
but there is just something about it when you come in here. It is, for me, Yeah, I smoke cigars at home, sometimes the patio. This is my preferred place to park my rear end. Whether I'm looking at a book or watching a movie on my laptop or whatever it might be, it is that everyone in here has that common vibe in terms of enjoying a cigar, enjoying a smoke. And it's, and I'll throw this in here only because it comes up. I know I have been scolded for smoking cigars. Now, I try to be, going back to the etiquette thing, I'm back in the day when you could still light up a pipe or a cigar or a cigarette in a restaurant, I never did. I always consider that's kind of putting myself in someone else's face, so I never did that. But I can remember my family physician years ago, and my late wife was clearly looking for me to be scolded. And he goes, if you smoke once in a while, I said, it's not a big deal.
Your doctor said that.
My doctor said that.
I'll bet your wife was thrilled.
He got looks that I don't think he expected. And I never smoked cigarettes. I cannot inhale. In fact, when you mentioned the surprise to the cigarette smoker, trust me, as a non-cigarette smoker, the couple times that I've inadvertently inhaled, I pretty much was expecting to call a medic for me.
You can end your day right there.
Yeah, it was a surprise. But it's this comfort zone. And, one of the little favorites on the side might be a little taste of a special bourbon or whiskey.
Absolutely.
That's something I see, that the pairing, as you would call it, I think. It seems to be a really, really big part, particularly later in the evenings for the regulars.
Well, not just in the evenings. I'm getting ready to step off camera here in a little bit and go get my coffee. But I want to back up to something that you said earlier, because I think it's important to inject just a little bit of history here for you kids. I feel like what we are in now, I would call the modern cigar era. There was definitely an older era where most people smoking cigars were white men of a certain age and a certain income tax bracket.
Yes.
There were cheaper cigars to be had. There were actually guys, particularly in the tobacco fields of Virginia and Kentucky, Tennessee, guys that would make their own cigars. They often were very raw and very new because they didn't know about fermentation and aging and all of that. So there was definitely a pre-modern era. I feel like we're in the modern era of cigar smokers now, and I feel like that started with the first big cigar boom in the 20th century, which was in the mid to late 90s. In the mid to late 90s, we had the tech boom, right? Everybody was learning about the internet for the first time, and I once had a friend of mine, a genius in that world, patiently try to explain to me for a half hour what Wi-Fi was, and at the end of it I was still asking him, are you making killer robots? I don't understand. But there was a lot of money made during that time, particularly out in Silicon Valley, and you had a lot of young people, men, women, from various ethnicities and various cultures, who had a lot of disposable income for the first time in their lives. And one of the things they wanted to do was they wanted to enjoy some, what they considered luxury items that they had never, so there was a lot of Italian cars, and there was a lot of expensive European suits, and there was also a lot of cigars.
I would never have envisioned cigars in Silicon Valley.
Absolutely.
And I can see, because, it is obviously, it can run into, if you're a regular, if you're a George Burns, of course he had obviously pretty unlimited income, but, the folks that enjoy a cigar every day, maybe after work, just kind of a way to make a break. Some people go to the martini bar, and...
But Burns fit that stereotype.
Well,
right?
You're right, actually, you're right.
And then also, it was very much an affectation for him. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, I grew up
almost for him.
Absolutely. Same with Groucho Marx, right?
Yeah. Oh,
but again, older white gentleman, right?
Yes.
So in the cigar boom of the 90s, now you had young people, but people of various ethnicities, not just white, but African American, Asian, Native American, East Indian, all that, trying cigars for the first time and really discovering that they liked them. They very quickly didn't just become a status symbol. They became something that they genuinely enjoyed. Consequently, cigar sales boomed. Then they tapered a little bit, and now, I will tell you honestly, that one of the industries that profited the most from COVID was the premium cigar industry.
That's interesting.
We pulled up so many more new cigar smokers because you had people working from home for some cases up to 2 years. And I can't tell you how many regulars we have They came in and they wanted something to do besides drink all day while they were working at home on their Zoom calls. Not that there's anything wrong with that if that's your guy. But they got into cigars. And first it became something to do, and later it became something that they genuinely enjoyed and still do now that they're going back to the office. So in this modern era, that old stereotype of a George Burns or a Henny Youngman or a Milton Berle, older white guy smoking a cigar.
For you young folks, just hit Google. You'll find out who these guys are.
That's been sort of blown out of the water. So to your point, the cigar community is way more vast and varied than it used to be. And the sort of mantra that we have, at least here in our shop, is common ground equals community. And as Earl said, we have people from all walks of life in here. We have young people, older people, middle-aged people like myself. Nathan's not nearly as old as he looks.
Take that however you like.
We have different political views.
Yep.
We have, everything's different. We're all at different phases of life. The one thing we can all agree on is it's a good idea to come in here and light up a cigar. And that's the common ground that we strive for here at the Smoking Lamp is if we can't agree on anything, we can agree that this is a good idea.
I think is a really important point. I have done some talks, and one of the things I talk about is the now not so common courtesy.
Yeah.
And, I think the cigar lounge may be one of the last bastions of common courtesy. I've seen disagreements on a topic, and we are a society that is very loud in our disagreements nowadays. The internet permitted that because you can say something to someone you would never have the guts to do to their face. And yet in here, even though you are, in some cases, everybody sitting at this table, maybe arguing about something, but it's more like a Tip O'Neill and Ron Reagan talking about a political issue where they're diametric opposites politically, but it's the common ground of a drink, a cigar, and a dinner. Shared.
I think the old term for it was civil discourse.
Imagine that. And it's still legal.
Yeah.
And I've never observed, I'm sure there's been something I haven't seen, but I've never observed anyone really be nasty.
There's a couple of reasons for that, I think, and I can let Nathan talk about this from his perspective as the youngest guy at the table. From my perspective as a middle-aged guy who is also the GM of this shop, we cultivate that atmosphere. And I think that that's something that's really important to do, is that everyone needs to know, everyone who walks through our doors needs to know that you are welcome here. And this is our common ground, whether you're just getting started. Oh, it happened. There it is.
Yep, I made it about
There it is.
I made it about an
It happened.
The first action.
But we're going to leave that there
Yep.
as an example.
Leave it to me to be the asshole.
But to my point, we Nathan, myself, Brian Barry, the owner, everybody who works here, we cultivate that atmosphere. So we're basically Switzerland. You are free to come in and free to get into a discussion with someone you agree with or disagree with. Where we typically draw the line, and again, it's very subjective, is when does civil discourse cross over that line into just arguing? Because that can bring the whole atmosphere of a shop down in a heartbeat, right? And people come here not to have that. They get enough of that on their radio, they get enough of it on their TV at home, maybe at work. This should be a place where that doesn't have to happen. So we do police that a little bit. We encourage, and the best thing to do is lead by example.
Right.
So there are some subjects for me personally when I'm in this shop, whether I'm working or I'm not, that are simply off topic. I'm not going to discuss them with you. I will be happy to discuss anything else with you. But I'm not going to discuss that political thing that you want to talk about. I'm not going to discuss that religious thing you want to talk about. I'm not going to discuss how much money you make versus how much money I make. I don't care. Because I can, on any given day, I can sit down and smoke a cigar with a guy who I know makes 7 figures and also have a lovely conversation and really enjoy the company of a guy who makes way less than that or who may currently be between jobs. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And I think the more people hang out in a lounge with people in a community like this, and I do want to hear your perspective as the young guy, my view is that this is a place where you can come and see people as people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? I mean, you definitely have a difference. You're from a completely different generation, so I want to hear your.